When this unpleasant neighbor kept expanding his yard, everyone nearby couldn't help but watch. All they could do was wait to see what would happen next, and what consequences might finally catch up with him. Gregory had no idea that an expensive lesson was coming his way. Miles felt his face heat up with anger as Gregory shouted at him, "Who do you think you are, questioning me about my own property? I've been here over 10 years, and you just moved in. Why don't you mind your own business?" Miles tried to respond, but the words wouldn't come. So he did exactly what Gregory said. He went home and kept quiet. Back inside, he could hardly believe what had just happened. As a retired park ranger, he knew exactly what Gregory's actions could lead to. But did Gregory? What was he thinking? How was Miles supposed to handle something like this, especially here, in a quiet retirement community where he expected peace, not conflict? Miles had only recently moved into the village, as Gregory so kindly reminded him, and up until now he had loved every moment. After years of serving as a park ranger all across the country, he had finally chosen to settle here to be closer to his family. Still, as much as he appreciated his new surroundings, something next door didn't sit right. He told himself to let it go, but the more he noticed, the harder that became. His troublesome neighbor seemed to be up to no good, and someone had to take notice. From the day he arrived, Miles had been curious about Gregory's garden. It was noticeably larger than everyone else's, stretching several feet past the boundary line into the parkland beyond their fences. At first, Miles wasn't sure if all yards were the same size, so he took time to walk around and meet others in the neighborhood, quietly checking their gardens. It didn't take long for him to realize what was going on. Gregory's yard wasn't just big, it was encroaching on public land, and that made it clear something was off. Gregory's yard wasn't just big, it was being used as his own private car lot. Inside, he kept several beautiful vintage cars that made Miles a little jealous, though he could appreciate the collection. When he looked closer, he realized Gregory had paved the entire area just for that purpose. At first, Miles figured maybe his neighbor had gone through all the right channels and gotten the proper permits from City Hall. It never crossed his mind that anything shady was going on, until one early morning when loud construction noises jolted him awake. That was the moment everything changed. Still half asleep, Miles peeked out the window and couldn't believe what he saw. Gregory and a helper were in the yard, yanking out the posts from the park's fence. What they did next made Miles fully wake up. They began cutting the fence, rolling it up, and moving it several feet deeper into the park. Then they stuck the posts back into the ground and reattached the fencing like nothing had happened. The only difference was that Gregory's yard had just grown, again. Before anyone could notice, they quickly laid down new paving stones, blending everything together. Miles stood there stunned. He didn't know all the complex's property rules yet, but he knew park boundaries like the back of his hand. There was no way this was legal. Still, he thought maybe he should talk to Gregory first, give him the benefit of the doubt. But that hope faded fast when he saw Gregory filling the new space with even more fancy cars, acting as if no one would ever notice. Trying to make sense of it all, Miles quietly asked a few nearby neighbors if they'd seen anything or spoken to Gregory about it. But every time he got the same uneasy response. A quick, "I don't know," followed by a closed door or a fast subject change. Something about the whole situation felt wrong, and it started to weigh on him. Night after night, he lay awake, turning it over in his mind. Back when he was a ranger, he'd never have ignored something like this. So why should he now? Finally, he decided he couldn't just let it slide. He needed to confront Gregory and hear what he had to say. It was a bright afternoon when Miles decided to approach Gregory, who was busy tinkering with one of his old cars in the ever-growing yard. The air smelled of motor oil and fresh paint. Gregory looked up as Miles walked over, wiping his hands on a rag, his face unreadable. "Hey, Gregory," Miles began, keeping his tone light. "I couldn't help but notice you've been expanding your yard quite a bit. Did you know that's part of the protected reserve? Gregory's eyes instantly narrowed. His guarded look hardened into open hostility. "What's it to you, newcomer?" he snapped, his voice full of contempt. "I've lived here over 10 years. I know what I'm doing. You just moved in. Mind your own business." Miles raised his hands calmly. "I was just asking." "No need to get upset." "Upset?" Gregory barked, stepping closer, his face turning red. "You don't know a thing about this place. Or me. Stay out of my affairs, or you'll regret it." The intensity in Gregory's voice startled Miles. This wasn't just a disagreement about property lines. This was something deeper. Gregory clearly felt cornered and was lashing out. Miles nodded slowly, stepping back. "All right, I'll mind my own business," he said quietly, though his mind was already racing. As he walked home, it all started to make sense. No wonder everyone else had refused to talk about Gregory's yard. They'd probably faced the same angry reaction and decided it wasn't worth it. Miles wasn't exactly scared, but he knew picking a fight with a man like Gregory could turn ugly fast. Back inside, he sat down and weighed his options. Reporting Gregory to the authorities made sense, but he worried it might stir up more trouble. Gregory was clearly unpredictable, and the last thing Miles wanted was a full-blown feud with his next-door neighbor. Plus, investigations could take time, leaving Miles stuck in the middle. Still doing nothing didn't sit right. Gregory was breaking the law, and worse, he was damaging a protected area that provided a home for local wildlife. The right thing to do was obvious. It was just a matter of timing. After thinking it through, Miles remembered that park rangers usually did a perimeter inspection during the summer. Maybe the past checks hadn't caught the changes, but now that Gregory had pushed the boundary so far, it would be impossible to miss. The rangers would find the issue and handle it, sparing Miles from another confrontation. He doubted Gregory would dare expand even further after that tense exchange, but he was soon proven wrong. It wasn't long before Gregory and his helper were at it again, moving the fence once more. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, while Gregory kept on expanding his yard as if nothing could stop him. All the while, Miles quietly watched and took notes. In a small notebook, he recorded every detail: dates, times, and descriptions of the cars being moved in and out of the expanded space. It wasn't new to him. Back in his ranger days, he'd done similar surveillance work on people who thought they were above the law. But Gregory wasn't clueless. He soon realized that Miles wasn't like the others who had ignored his behavior. This neighbor was paying attention, and that made him nervous. So, Gregory tried to scare him off. Little by little, he started small acts of intimidation. But when each one was met with nothing more than a calm shrug, Gregory only pushed further, hoping for a reaction. One morning, Miles found his car splattered with muddy water. Another day, his trash was tossed across his porch. Still, he refused to bite. He knew better than to respond. Any reaction would only feed Gregory's need for control. Instead, he waited. If the rangers didn't catch the illegal expansion during their summer inspection, then he'd rethink his next step. For now, his plan was simple: stay patient and let the authorities handle it properly. That way, Gregory couldn't twist things or drag him into a personal feud. Thankfully, winter soon arrived, and with it came a break from the tension. Gregory left for his seasonal home, and the whole neighborhood settled into a peaceful silence. Miles enjoyed the calm, though he knew it wouldn't last forever. He used the quiet months to organize his notes, making sure everything was ready if he needed to report the issue officially. Winter in his new home was breathtaking. From his porch, Miles could watch the animals that thrived in the cold, foraging through the snow for food. The blanket of white across the ground and trees gave the world a still beauty that soothed him. He felt deeply content with his decision to move here. Being surrounded by nature had always grounded him. Maybe that was why Gregory's actions bothered him so much. How could someone live next to such beauty and treat it with such disregard? But nature has a way of balancing things out. As the days grew longer and the snow began to melt, green shoots and bursts of color returned to the land. Miles felt a familiar excitement rise within him. Summer was coming, the season he had been waiting for. Soon the rangers would return for their inspection, and Gregory's reckless expansion would finally catch up to him. As the weather warmed, the area around Miles's home came alive again. Hikers passed by his fence, children's laughter echoed from the nearby trail, and deer wandered out to forage among the fresh greenery. Miles loved every bit of it, but nothing compared to the morning he woke to the sound of voices outside. Curious, he peeked through his window and saw park authorities standing by Gregory's fence, clipboards in hand. They were measuring, taking photos, and jotting notes with serious expressions. Miles couldn't resist stepping outside. As he walked closer, one of the officers looked up. "Good morning, sir." "Do you live here?" he asked. Miles nodded. "Yeah, I moved in a few months ago. Is everything all right?" The officer explained that they had received an anonymous report about someone expanding their property into the protected reserve, and they were here to investigate. Miles's heart beat faster. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. He hadn't been the one to report Gregory, but it didn't matter. Fate had finally caught up with him. When the officers asked if they could speak with him for a few minutes, Miles gladly agreed. He decided to answer only what they asked, keeping things professional and calm. There was no need to offer extra details that might seem like meddling. The officers asked about Gregory's activities, and Miles replied simply and factually, handing over his notebook with all his carefully logged notes. "This is very thorough," one of them said, flipping through the pages. "Thank you for your cooperation." Miles nodded politely as they walked off toward Gregory's front door. Moments later, the officers posted a large notice where everyone could see it. The bold print made it clear. Gregory had 21 days to restore the yard and appear in court. On top of that, he faced a $1,000 fine, one that would grow each day the issue wasn't resolved. The message was unmistakable. The authorities weren't playing around. Miles couldn't help but smile as he read the notice. Finally, justice had caught up to his troublesome neighbor. For all those months, Gregory had acted untouchable, certain he could do whatever he wanted. Now he was facing the consequences. It felt good to know that in the end, the rules he'd once worked so hard to protect still mattered. To Miles's amazement, Gregory managed to make his situation even worse. The 21-day deadline came and went, and still there was no sign of him. When the authorities returned to follow up, they found the property empty. No payments, no responses, nothing. As a result, they issued a new notice. The vehicles on Gregory's lot would be confiscated so the land could be restored to its rightful boundary. He was given 3 days to respond, but again he ignored it. A few mornings later, Miles stood at his window watching as tow trucks rolled into the neighborhood. The rumble of their engines filled the air as workers began loading up Gregory's prized vintage cars one by one. It was quite a scene, loud, long, and impossible for anyone to miss. Neighbors peeked out from their porches and windows, watching in silence. Not a single person spoke up to defend Gregory. That alone said everything about how he had treated the people around him. Miles couldn't help but feel a quiet satisfaction as he watched the law take its course. After all the months of frustration, the system had finally stepped in. When Gregory eventually returned from his winter getaway, the first thing he saw was the stack of official notices taped to his door. His face twisted with panic and anger as he tore them down and read every word. Miles, sitting outside with his morning coffee, could tell the exact moment it sank in. Gregory rushed inside, and within minutes, an enraged scream echoed from the backyard. The sight that greeted him must have been a nightmare. His once paved yard had been torn up, the fence put back where it originally stood, and all of his beloved cars were gone. The mess was nothing compared to the shock. Moments later, Gregory stormed toward Miles's porch, his eyes blazing. Miles stayed seated, calm as ever, watching him approach. "What do you want?" Miles asked evenly. "You! You did this!" Gregory shouted, waving the notice in the air. "You reported me. Tell them they're wrong, that I didn't know what I was doing." Miles met Gregory's furious gaze without flinching. "I didn't report you, Gregory. They found out on their own, and you knew exactly what you were doing. Remember? You told me so yourself." "This is ridiculous," Gregory shouted. "I was out of town. I can't be blamed for missing some notice." "Wait, you were here all winter. Why didn't you call me? You could have stopped this from happening." Miles gave a calm, almost amused smile. "Gregory, I clearly remember you telling me to mind my own business. So that's what I did. What's the problem now?" Gregory's face went red with anger, his jaw tightening. For a moment he looked like he wanted to argue more, but then he stopped, realizing there was nothing left to say. Without another word, he turned sharply and stomped back toward his house. Miles watched him go, feeling a deep sense of relief and satisfaction. He hadn't needed to raise his voice or fight back. He'd done the right thing, and the law had handled the rest. In the weeks that followed, Gregory seemed like a completely different man. The anger and arrogance that once defined him faded into quiet resignation. The authorities repaired the damaged section of the reserve fence, replacing the old wooden posts with sturdy aluminum ones solidly cemented into the ground. They even installed a small surveillance camera nearby to make sure no one tried the same stunt again. Gregory was forced to attend his court date and pay the steep fines that had piled up. But the hardest blow came when he learned he wouldn't be getting all his confiscated cars back. The loss clearly humbled him. Over time, he grew quieter, more polite, and far less confrontational with everyone in the neighborhood. Miles watched the change with quiet contentment. Justice had been done, not through anger or revenge, but through patience, honesty, and persistence. The protected reserve was safe again, and the peace in the community had returned. As spring arrived, Miles often took slow walks through the reserve, enjoying the sight of new flowers, the sound of birds, and the feeling of calm that surrounded him. Reflecting on everything that had happened, he felt grateful. His experience with Gregory had reminded him of something important. Doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. The same values that had guided him through his years as a ranger still mattered now: integrity, patience, and a respect for what's right. What about you? How would you have handled this situation? Would you have stayed as patient as Miles? Do you think Gregory got what he deserved? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring real-life stories like this one.